I appreciate the three guidelines, Dr. Zuber, that you laid out. Maintain the investment, and I know we're not addressing the budget at all today, but I can say for myself and probably a few others here, we are very interested in maintaining that budget. And so while we're seeing discussion of cuts elsewhere, I think this is a very important time and very important work that we need to maintain that type of investment. And of course, the STEM-capable workforce that you mentioned is another important area to both create that pipeline, but then also make sure those kids know that we're going to maintain the investment, so this is going to be a continued career for us. And then thirdly, maintaining the trust and confidence of the public, which you've all addressed today. And so I wanted to focus a little bit on that transdisciplinary approach and how we are going to take advantage of sort of this opportunity that I think we have now, where you have the private sector very interested in investment, you need to maintain the public investment, and how are we best going to maximize both? And I want to emphasize that anything private is not a substitute for the public, because we still need that basic research, and much of the private can often be maybe a little bit more risk-taking. And I often hear that in talking to people who are interested in the private research, that they realize they are going to have opportunities that are a little riskier or a little more outside the box than by nature some of the public research. But I wanted to follow up with Dr. Yamamoto. What has been your experience when sort of taking outside the box ideas to the National Science Foundation, and how can we make that easier for them, and what guidelines might be the best to adjust, or how do we best make that work?
Right. So let me start by saying that I think that NSF is, as an agency, quite welcoming to broad-based ideas. But as I said, the barriers that are intrinsic to bureaucratic separation of the directorates in this case are problematic. And my own experience in carrying some big transdisciplinary ideas and approaches to the NSF was sort of met with being handed an org chart of NSF and said, you know, go out and shop your idea around the separate directorates. There's not a home for, an intrinsic home for these big kinds of ideas. So my idea would really be to create such a home, to be welcoming of those kinds of approaches for every grant application that's made, that currently, that when they cross those boundaries, struggle to find a natural home, and may struggle in peer review as well for that reason. And so I think that is the kind of thing that is necessary. I might say that this idea of kind of a programmatic focus that floats over the boundaries that separate disciplinary approaches is basically the way that we've organized the research approaches at UCSF, where we have conventional departments like every other institution that are separated by these disciplinary approaches. And then floating over those are research programs that really have a big say about how resources are deployed, how we reach into the different departments and bring together investigators that can merge their skills and really go after problems that otherwise would not be solvable or even detectable by individual researchers. So this is an idea in a way that has been tested, and I think would help to address this challenge and opportunity for transdisciplinarity.
Right. Thank you. And Dr. Spies, could you address how, you know, when we have more openness and we get that, how that both helps the public research as well as the private, and how that might help us maximize the value in both areas, as well as make for more usable data and information, and how you would see that working in an ideal situation?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. In an open framework, we think about knowledge as a public good, and therefore its accessibility and the credibility that openness brings to it is available to anyone. Obviously, we need to facilitate that sometimes, but that basic accessibility is still there. We've heard many examples of what has come out of the NSF from a basic science standpoint. And so if we can increase the quality of that and increase the efficiency of that work, the work that comes out of this basic science programs, we can see then these end users receiving those benefits. They'll see the same efficiency gains. They'll see the lower risk, perhaps, because the quality would have been increased.
And is there maybe, in terms of the community, is there some of the fear, as you're talking about, that everybody makes mistakes? We were talking about, we find problems and things, but is there sort of a cultural fear of having that out there instead of sort of understanding, well, let's have a whole bigger community that's finding those mistakes sooner that we all make and sharing it in a way that helps for collaboration? I'm thinking, if Thomas Edison obviously had to go through a lot of experiments before things get right. If he was sharing this in a bigger community, it might have all happened faster, right? Not that you don't want to, when you have your research, you want to maybe keep that to yourself too, I understand, but do we have a culture in the scientific community that makes it sort of punishing to have that information out there and shared?
This is certainly a cultural issue, and I don't know if it's necessarily punishing, but we don't really allow discourse around failure. Peer review happens after the work has been done, and so there's really very little influence that can have because you already did the work, and so it's a cultural issue, and so the perhaps fear. I think is across any area. No one wants to make mistakes, and no one wants to be seen for these mistakes. But we need to embrace them. That's a critical role in science. It's a very important part of the scientific process.
Okay, and I know I'm over my time, but if our other witnesses had anything to comment in that area, just wanted to give you an opportunity to.
So I would just say that in science, if you make a mistake, it's okay, but it's better if you correct the mistake yourself than have somebody else correct the mistake. So I think we ought to incentivize a system where mistakes within groups are that it's recognized in a positive way. So.
I would just add, and perhaps we'll have more time to talk about this later, that issues of open science and the ways in which sharing can happen in very different ways across different scientific fields. And so learning across fields, in fields like astronomy, for example, where public data has been a norm for so long, we have a lot to learn about how mistakes are determined and how we can share and accelerate findings. So there's a lot on this topic that's of great interest to us at NSF.
Great. Thank you. And I now recognize Mr. Lipinski for 5 minutes.